I'm Kira Jo, and today I am doing the Palette Tag 5000, which was started by Chic Geek, and I thought it looked like fun, so I have my list of questions and I pulled the palettes that I want to share, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you. First up is a palette you wore on a special occasion. For me, that's the Natasha Denona My Dream palette. It's got a good selection of warm and cool. Some things are more neutral, some things are lighter, some things are darker. And I wore this for a choir concert that I was performing in. And I think it's a perfect palette for, a fancy dinner or a concert or any kind of event like that. Next on the list is a palette you love, but it is repetitive. I chose Colourpop Meant to Be. Colourpop has a lot of these palettes that are monochromatic, and so there's only so many shades to choose. But I think it's really funny they did an entire 9-pan monochromatic palette that was just mint because there aren't that many shades of mint. But I really like mint as a shade, and so I still love this palette and I use it pretty often, but it could probably be a quad or something and you could still get the exact same looks because these shimmers are all so similar. Like this one, and this one are almost identical. This one's a tiny bit different, but still pretty close. Like these two are pretty similar. This is the same tone, but just a tiny tad bit darker. These two are really similar, but this is just darker. This is the middle. Anyway, yeah, super repetitive palette, but still one that I really like using. The next one is the palette you've got your money's worth on. And I chose the Kaleidos and Angelica collab Club Nebula. This is, to this day, my very favorite and most used palette. I'm pretty gentle when I dip into my eyeshadows, and so for there to be that many dips that are obvious is a pretty big deal. And I use this palette all the time. I think it's got some really beautiful shades in it, and almost all of them are pretty unique, even when I compare them to shades that I think are going to be similar in my collection. So this one, I definitely feel like I got my money's worth, and I'm super glad I bought it since it was limited edition. The next one is a palette that's an amazing deal. I chose the Colourpop Baroque palette. I think this is one of the best palettes Colourpop has done. The color story is really interesting and different. I think especially for Colourpop because they almost always have those basic beige colors for blending in the crease. I love how this whole palette is cool toned, and then some of them are really interesting. I mean, these two are pretty similar to each other, but I really like that they have a couple of duochromes in this palette. I love the depth. I love that you can go the direction of this burgundy depth or the dark blue depth, and I just think overall this palette's a really good buy. And Colourpop is a very affordable price point all the time, but there's just certain palettes like this one that actually stand out in my collection and that I reach for specific types of looks, and so those are the ones I feel like are a really good deal from Colourpop. Next is a quad you love and wish was a larger palette. I wasn't sure I would think of a palette for this question, but then I remembered that I have this little glitter quad from Nebula, and I think the formula is really nice and I love the tones that are in it, but I wish there were more colors because I really like their glitters. And I know they have another one, but even that one doesn't have the colors I would want. I think it would be really nice to have maybe an iridescent green. This one is an iridescent yellow, and I would love to have an iridescent green. This one is purple leaning. I would love one that was a little more blue. So I think this one would be a great candidate for becoming a larger palette and having more tones of glitter. The next one is a palette where you love the quality, but you hate the packaging. And for me, I love the look of this one. This is the Becca and Barbie Ferreira collab, and it's called the Prismatica palette, I believe. Yeah, Prismatica palette. And it opens like this, and it's also not flat. It's so close to being flat without actually being flat. So I love the highlighters in here. They're really pretty and they work well as eye toppers. I also do sometimes use them on my cheeks. These two especially are fun to layer over blushes. But this packaging is ridiculous. I can't stack anything on top of it. No matter how I store it, it's kind of awkward. I have to put it on the top of the stack or the end of, if I have them lined up vertically. And I just wish that it was a flat, normal palette, and I also wish it wasn't quite so chunky. The next one is to show your dream palette with singles. So I put together this little dream palette for me. I will swatch it on my arm for you. I put this together pretty quickly. I'm sure that if I took more time to put something together, I would change some things, but I am excited about the way it turned out. I think it's really pretty and inspiring. So I'm gonna go ahead and swatch that. So the shades I put in my palette are Clionadh Radiance, Sydney Grace Cali, Clionadh Adornment, Clionadh Emblem, Sydney Grace Dive, Clionadh Niello, and then these three on the bottom are all from the Sydney Grace and Temptalia palettes. And my thought behind this was I could do deep looks, I could go pretty light. Any of these shimmers are beautiful on their own or just with a black liner. And so I think this offers a lot of versatility and also represents the type of eyeshadow I usually wear. Next is palettes you like to combine together. I chose the Kaleidos Club Nebula palette again, and also Glamlight Ice Cream Dream. These two pair together really well, and they also pair really well with lots of other palettes. So Ice Cream Dream has so many nice pastels in it, and so this is really fun to add with any other palette that doesn't have a lot of color, especially if it doesn't have a lot of colorful mattes or mid-tone mattes. And then Club Nebula has these amazing colorful deepening shades. They apply very, very deep and they build really well. And so anytime I want a deep shade that's not a black, this is the palette I reach for. And so these two just go really well together between the light colorful shades in the Glamlight palette and the really deep colorful shades in the Kaleidos palette. And then the next one is a large palette you wish was smaller. And that's again going to be the Glamlight Ice Cream Dream for me. I use these two rows and these four shimmers almost every time I use this palette, and I hardly ever touch any of these. Like, these are all so similar, these like bronzy shimmers. And then I'll use this one up here. I've been really surprised actually how much I love this Red Velvet shade. And I'll sometimes use Black Cherry, but I almost never use this one or this one. I sometimes use the white. I hardly ever use these two purple shimmers or this yellow shimmer or this brown. Like, I really would have been so happy with this palette to only be these three rows. And the last one is an eyeshadow palette you wish had a matching face palette. Now hear me out, this might be a strange choice, but Kaleidos Escape Pod. It's got a lot of bright shades, so maybe it doesn't immediately lend itself to face palette. Kaleidos has one of my favorite highlighter formulas and one of my favorite blush formulas. So I think they could do a really great blush and highlighter palette, and they could be in tones that complement the shades that are in the Escape Pod palette. So there could be one that was pretty neutral, like a highlighter and a blush, both that were pretty neutral and that would match the peachy tones and the neutral browns. And then they could have another set, so a highlighter and a blush that would go with the bright orange and bright pink. So it would be kind of maybe a coral leaning blush or something like that, and then a highlighter that could go with that. And then they could do one that was like a baby pink but that leaned a little bit lavender to match with these purples and this blue. And I just think that would be really cool. This was a really fun video to film. Let me know what you thought of my choices down in the comments. I hope you'll subscribe to see more from me, and until next time, I'll see you later.